Whether on the field, on the court, or on the balance beam, there's more to winning than the final score. Hi, I'm Patrick Manning of Black Desert Resort. We recognize the effort it takes to succeed. That's why we are proud to partner with Utah Checkdown, the podcast that tells you the story before the game, then gives you a recap of what happened when it's all over, the grit, the glory, and the disappointments. Join us for stories of Utah's finest athletes and coaches. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to the Utah Checkdown Podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong, and I'm happy to be with you again for another week of this podcast. I'm coming at you just coming off of a sickness over the weekend. Man, I didn't feel good at all. After I finished recording the podcast last week, I started kind of feeling the effects, and it's just kind of been downhill from there. So today's the first day that I'm feeling good. Yesterday was a nice little recovery day. Well, sitting on my couch watching men's and women's basketball. So, it's fun. I can't hear out of one of my ears, which is, it's exciting, right? Who wants to be deaf, right? It's great. But, I'm here. I'm ready to go. We're going to talk some Utah basketball. We'll talk some gymnastics. We'll just basically talk some recaps of what took place over the weekend and kind of some look-aheads for each of these teams. So we'll jump into that, but first let me tell you about our partners, Black Desert. Black Desert Resort isn't just your home. It's an endless retreat where life is played your way. From intimate studios to spacious four-bedroom suites, the raw beauty of southern Utah is your new backyard. Discover its championship golf course, exquisite dining, and world-class outdoor adventures, all yours to conquer. This is luxury your way. Learn more about owning a luxury residence at blackdesertresort.com. Come play, come stay. All right, let's just rip the Band-Aid off. Yes, we're going to talk about Runnin Utes basketball. Man, Utah had all the momentum. And I'm not trying to sit here and say that Utah was suddenly on this tear and everything was better. But, you get two big wins over the Kansas schools. And look, you can argue that maybe Kansas isn't as good as their rankings at the time. But at the same time, clearly they've earned it from that point. So you beat Kansas, you beat Kansas State. You have this great 2-win streak. You're going on the road to a UCF team that honestly, they'd lost 9 of their last 10. They were in a 7-game losing skid. And yes, road games are a challenge, but this seemed like the easiest road game that you could possibly get, right? Yes, it's cross country. Whatever. You can make all the excuses for what this is. And instead, Utah just basically bottoms out, and they're competitive for the most part, but they end up losing 76-72. Just what a brutal situation for the Runnin Utes. And the last series that Utah had the ball, so essentially, well, let's back it up. So Gabe Madsen ties the game up after Utah essentially had gone down by 10 at one point. Utah had a double-digit lead. They essentially let UCF come all the way back. Then in the second half, UCF decides to just go on a tear. A lot of that has to do with some Utah problems, and I'll get into that. But throughout all of that, Utah fights back, and it's largely because of Gabe Madsen being able to hit some three-pointers at key times. He gets the final one to go, ties the game up. It's 72-72. UCF has the ball with, I believe it's 11 seconds left. And so all you really have to do is have a good defensive series. If they make a shot, so be it, right? You got beat, right? It's still a situation where you'd be frustrated that you lost the game because of where Utah was at. And like I said, I'll get into some of the other issues. But at least you got beat by a final shot, right? Buzzer beaters happen, whatever the case may be. So all you needed was a great defensive series. What happens is Utah essentially just paves the golden path for their guard to be able to just go in for an easy layup. Like, he didn't even go up like a straight layup. He came with almost it was an up and under. And so it's like he had to go through all of that. He's still kind of threatened by going with the up and under and still gets the easy layup. Okay, so they're up by 2, right? There's something like 3 seconds left in the game. Ezra Sarr goes to inbound the ball. Gabe Madsen is kind of running to be able to get the ball so that he could get it, kind of have that forward momentum. Nothing wrong with that necessarily. The problem is the way that Ezra throws the ball in, it's behind Gabe. Gabe has to kind of turn back a little bit. It hits off his hands and then immediately goes out of bounds. And that gives UCF another chance at the possession. At that point, you've essentially killed all chances of winning the game. Sure, UCF could go and miss free throws. Utah gets a Hail Mary shot, that kind of stuff. It can happen, right? But the reality is your best shot was on that inbounds pass. And it's a mistake, yeah, it happens, right? Like, it happens. But I think in totality of what had happened that day, it was just another error in everything that took place. Now, those two guys, Ezra Osar or as I should say, as the commentator says, Ezra Osar. It's been really interesting to listen to some of these ESPN Plus broadcasts. I'm just going to say, we're not going to get into that. And I have no room to talk. Listen, I butcher names all the time, so I get it. I really do. It happens. So, anyways, those two were, pivotal for Utah. I mean, those were the guys that made it so that Utah could stay in that game. So, like, it's hard to completely fault them, but at the same time, that's the situation it was, right? It's the quarterback throwing the short pass where the guy has to come behind and get it, and it's really difficult to get it. You lose the game because your wide receiver can't bring it down on a pass that wasn't even directly to him, right? Like, it's that kind of situation. Anyways, so then UCF goes to the free throw line. Obviously, Utah needs him to make at least, well, you don't want to make any, but you need him to make only one to have a chance. Instead, he drills both, and, Utah has no hope. So you end up losing 76-72. What a tough situation, right? And as much as the turnover at the end really sucks, it was really that defensive series that kind of blew it open. And I don't know if that's what Utah was going for, just hurry and let them score so that we have a chance to win it at the buzzer. I'd be really fascinated to find that out. I can't imagine a coach with everything that Craig is fighting for. I can't imagine that would be a scenario where he would just say, sure, give them the open lane. We're going to block them out, off the side. We're not going to let them have any three-pointers. Just let them have the two-pointer. We trust Gabe. We'll let him do it. Nobody wants to give them the advantage, right? You want to give them a good defensive series, keep it tight, whatever it may be. And then if you have to use Gabe, so be it. But you can't let them just immediately get the ball. I don't know. Like, there's just so much stuff that Utah is fighting against, right? Like, Craig is fighting for his job, essentially. I know we've talked about that. So to be able to try to allow that it just wouldn't make sense to me. Now, I'm not saying that didn't happen, not saying that wasn't what was drawn up, but it was not the way that you want to end that game. And instead, you go from having a 2-game win momentum against two teams that, are probably NCAA tournament bound, and we'll see. Kansas is really in a free fall at this point. But you've got two teams that are potentially in the NCAA tournament bubble, and then you go to play UCF, which, like I said, had lost 9 of their last 10. They were on a 7-game losing skid. They'd only won 5 Big 12 games. I mean, like, this is a game that Utah had no business losing, and you basically crapped the bed, right? Like, no other better way to put it. Utah had a chance to be 500 in Big 12 play. For all the conversations around Utah and Craig Smith, being 500 in Big 12 play, it's not. Look, I don't want to say like it's somehow like this moral victory here that it's like, oh, everything's great. But coming into the year, if you were 500 in Big 12 play, I think Utah fans would be excited about that, right? I mean, obviously you'd want more. Who doesn't want more? But I think if you could say that you have wins over Kansas State, you got a win over BYU, which is doing very well, and you were able to be 500, you could look at that from an objective viewpoint and say, look, Utah had a great season. There's not to say that Utah can't finish 500. The road to there is much more challenging, especially losing to UCF. But that's what's so frustrating about this team, is they go and they can beat Kansas and Kansas State. Yes, they were at home. I get that. The crowds were there and really supporting Utah, so there's some advantage there. But then they go and drop these games to a team like UCF. They went on the road and lost to Cincinnati, and Cincinnati's a good team. But they lost to West Virginia. You had these games where, on paper, you may not necessarily have been predicted to win it going into those games, but at least you had a fighting chance. Whereas you go on the road and play Houston, yeah, there's probably no chance, right? You go play Iowa State, probably no chance. Like, that's the thing. You go into these games and there's just a different level of play with this team, and it's not been consistent. And that shows, and obviously their record, but I think that's the frustrating thing with this team, is you can see there's potential at times, but then they just kind of don't show up. And part of not showing up was essentially shown in their 19 turnovers. 19 turnovers, which led to 20 points for UCF. Utah started out this game with a 12-2 lead, right? Like, Utah had the momentum. They were doing everything right. They were hitting their shots. They limited UCF, which was only shooting 30% in that first half, and Utah was doing well. And then suddenly turnovers crept in. And suddenly Utah couldn't figure out how to play basketball. There was one point where the commentators on TV said that UCF had 15 more possessions than Utah. And that's simply because of those turnovers, or 15 more shots, that disparity. But that's simply because of the turnovers. And so when you give a team that many chances to have success over you, it's probably going to come out the other way, right? I mean, the fact that UCF only won by 4 and you gave them 20 points off of turnovers kind of shows that Utah could probably have been the easier, better team to come away with a victory. That's a pretty easy stat line, right? Like, you can look at it. Utah shot the ball better. They out-rebounded the ball, and yet they had more turnovers. And the problem here is it's not like UCF is this team that turns the ball over a ton or forces turnovers a ton and, is scrappy and doesn't. They weren't. This is a team that really doesn't force a lot of errors, and it's just against a Utah team that just was careless with the ball. I mean, there was times where Utah got a stop. They literally got their own steal, and suddenly they're throwing the ball down into, like, congested traffic where there's no play to be made, right? Like, you're trying to make a play on something that didn't need to be made just to try to get, a number. Like, there's one time where you easily had numbers. It was a 5-on-4. The fifth guy was outside of the camera view because he was back down by the basket. He was on the floor trying to get up, getting back there. You had a 5-on-4 situation, and not that that's some, like, magic number. It's not like a 5-on-3 or whatever, but, you still had the advantage. And Utah went ahead and threw the ball away and gave UCF the ball again. There's another time where it was like a cross-court pass that easily went into the arms of the UCF guy, who ran down, hit a transition bucket, and once again changed the momentum. This is exactly the problem that Utah's had this season. They're opportunistic, yes, but at the same time they're careless and not really smart with the ball. And there's times where, like, you look at them and they can't really dribble the ball, and you wonder, like, what's going on, right? Like, there's times they're in the post, and it's not like the post is tough, right? Like, it's congested. You've got a lot of people vying for the ball. You've got a lot of hands in there. Like, being down in the post is a very difficult thing to do for a player because there's just so much activity down there. But at the same time, when Utah can't even collect the ball down there and make a play, that makes it challenging. And so then all it takes is UCF to be able to poke the ball away pretty easily, and it's gone. But it wasn't even that. It's Utah throwing it away. There was one, for example, like Mike Sharp jumps. He comes in for this, high layup, which, he's got the height. Like, every time he jumps, he looks like he could just kind of lay the ball in because that's how high he is. So he gets there. There's one that he splits the defenders. He runs up. He goes for what looks like he's going to get a layup, and instead, he's above the rim, mind you. He's above the rim, and he decides to dish it off to the guy below him who has 3 guys draped all over him and turns the ball over. Like, you can't be making those plays. Just go up for the basket. Lay it in, right? And so, like, that's the thing that Utah continues to do. They continue to have these unforced errors that allows them to get, beat in transition shots, or just simply doesn't give them opportunities to be able to succeed. And that's what the story of the season is. There's teams that obviously just beat Utah. They're better, right? Houston, Iowa State. There's other teams, right? But like those games you expect to lose in simply because they are clearly better. They have a more consistent theme. They've been together. They're winning at a high level. All these things. Whereas Utah, they just can't find that consistency. And it's not for a sake of having the guys on the floor that can do it. It's just like they get sped up and they like get wound up and like have to figure out something to do when in reality the simplest play is there. And yet, for whatever reason, they find ways to just lose the ball. I don't know. Like it's really frustrating to watch because you have these performances by Gabe Madsen. 23 points, 5 of 9 shooting from deep. 5 3-pointers. That's pretty good, right? Ezra Asar, 20 points, 7 of 10 from the field, 6 of 7 from the free throw line. This is a guy that has absolutely improved his free throw shooting numbers. He's continually getting to the line. He's one of Utah's best players at being able to get to the line because he gets down there and he works. And he's now hitting them at a better rate, right? So you have two guys that between them, 43 points, that should be enough to at least give you something, right? I'm not going to say that that's going to get you a win, but at the same time, they gave you enough to be able to put you in a position. But those turnovers caused the problem. You had Mike Sharv-Jumps, who started off hot. He had 11 quick points and then decided that the hoop was, hula hoop ring, right? Like he thought he could hit every shot from wherever he shot it. And instead missed badly on multiple shots. These are the types of things where like you've got to be able to be self-aware, right? Like shooters are going to shoot, right? Like we've heard that saying, we understand it, but there comes a point where you have to realize I don't have it, right? And I understand like with some guys like Gabe Madsen, you're generally going to be okay with him shooting the ball even if he misses it, right? Obviously, there was that game against Cincinnati where he had 8 3-pointers, but at the same time, he had 22 attempts. I talked about that I don't want to say he lost the game for Utah because there's other factors there, but him shooting the ball that many times didn't necessarily help, especially late. And so you've got to be able to have some self-awareness to say, yeah, shooters are going to shoot. I've obviously got to take my shots, but you got to also realize, like, I'm not hitting them. I'm not even close. Like, you've got to be able to think, okay, look, the last 2 that I've shot, they weren't even close, whatever. Like, I get it. It's a game. You're in the moment. You've got an open look. You're going to do it. At the same time, Sharv-Jumps, he wasn't even close, and that kind of hurt Utah in a lot of those attempts, especially when it wasn't necessarily needed. There were times where he just decided he wanted to shoot it. They were contested shots. Maybe there was better looks. Utah wasn't always doing the best at kind of getting open. That's something that's been a frustrating thing with Utah as well this year is they kind of stand around and look and wait for somebody to do something. There's not a lot of moving. There's not a lot of ways to get open. There's a lot of we're going to try to do our best to be able to get Gabe open, right? You've got Lawson Lovering standing at the top of the post. He's kind of facilitating the offense, and he's going to set that screen so that Gabe can come off of it and quickly get a shot off. Now, when it works, it's phenomenal, right? There's very few teams that can stop what Gabe Madsen does because he's got such a quick release that he can be sprinting off of that screen and immediately pull up and spot up to shoot that 3-pointer. So, like, when it works, it's great. The problem is that can't work every single time, right? And so you've got Lawson up there kind of clogging up the top of the key, and teams have figured this out, right? They're sending 2-3 guys up there to kind of contest what he's doing. And the problem is you've got other guys that are just standing around. You don't have anybody else moving around. The ball movement doesn't really go very well. It's static. It's not fluid. And so you see this team that struggles. Utah has found the success. As I've talked about, this is a team effort. It can't just be Gabe Madsen. It can't just be Ezra Asar. Now, granted, both of these guys, when they step up, that usually gives Utah a good chance, but Utah still has to play as a team to win. They don't have a ton of the best guys on the floor every given night, right? We've seen that. They've got a bunch of depth players that are doing well, that are trying hard, but they're not quite to the level of what some of these other teams have. But when they play great team complementary basketball, I don't want to call them unstoppable, but they are a very tough team to beat because they've got the length, they've got shooters, and they've got the ability to be able to take over the games with Gabe Madsen, Ezra Asar, Lawson Lovering at times. That's where it is. But instead, Utah just kind of goes into a shell of itself and doesn't know what to do. And then they turn over the ball, and then they get static. They don't move. They're not consistent. And you see this result. And you're left shaking your head like, what's going on? And, you can point to Craig Smith. You can say, oh, well, he's not coaching them up. I don't agree with that. I think there comes a point where, as a coach, and I've coached baseball, I've coached basketball, I've coached enough to be able to understand how this goes. You can teach kids over and over and over and over, and sometimes they just don't get it. And sometimes natural instincts in a game take over and they just do what they want to do. Now, I get that. It's still a bit more sporadic and inconsistent, and so you can blame that always on the head coach. The head coach always takes the responsibility. The one thing about Kyle Whittingham is no matter what happens, win or lose, he'll always take the blame, or he'll give the credit to his coaches if it's a win, right? He's trying to give the right people the blame or credit. And so at the default, this is Craig Smith's fault, right? And I understand there's a growing sentiment among the fan base that Craig Smith should be let go. You can have that opinion. I've given my thoughts on that. I'm not saying that he's perfect, and I'm not an apologist for Craig Smith, but I don't think this is fully him. And he doesn't fully have a team that works. Now, that's on him because he's the one that's recruiting that team, right? So if there's a fault, that's the biggest fault, is that he's recruited these guys that some are going to be a miss. Some aren't going to be the level. But you're seeing individual progress with some of these guys. So there is coaching going on that's clearly nobody's giving the advantage to Craig Smith, right? They only want to point to the things when Utah loses and say that, oh, this is all Craig's fault. Well, not looking at different players like Ezra, who has improved. Miro Little, he's inconsistent, but Craig's still trying to get the best out of them. He's showing him he's got confidence in him and doing it. Now, there's other situations where you kind of leave your head scratching with some of these lineups where you haven't played Mason Madsen for, weeks, and suddenly he's getting a ton of minutes with guys that don't generally, they haven't played a ton together. So there's moments like that where you look at it and you kind of have your head scratched, like, what is going on here? Like, why are you playing Hunter Erickson and Mason Madsen and Zach Keller all at the same time when these three players probably haven't played in a lineup in weeks? And now you're going on the road. And I understand it. It's UCF, so you think, okay, maybe we can do it. But, those are those coaching things that I'm more concerned about. I'm not necessarily concerned about some of these other things that fans are. I'm more concerned about stuff like that where it's like, what's the strategy here? You're in a situation where UCF is going on a run, and look, players have got to get some rest. There's foul troubles at times, but at the same time, you're rolling out a roster that hasn't had any chemistry together in the last few weeks because they just haven't played together. Some of these guys, like I said, they don't play a ton. You'll get some games where Caleb Lohner, he doesn't play, and then suddenly he's getting 10, 15 minutes the next game. This is the stuff that kind of is head scratching to me. That's where I get more confused. And that's where I understand matchups are different, and so some players are going to have better matchups and different things that way. So, I get that. You don't need to tell me that I don't understand that. But at the same time, these are those things that are kind of frustrating to watch, whereas Utah doesn't have the consistency that they need, right? And then you have a guy like Lawson Lovering who essentially was erased from that game. He had 2 points. He didn't really impact the game the way that many would want. And yes, UCF probably has the only other player that can counter him in somebody with his size. But at the same time, you've got to be able to have your big involved in the game, especially if you want to be able to get those spot-up 3-point shots, right? You want to be able to force the post. You want to be able to clear out, get the spacing there. Instead, Utah has kind of led teams to easily scout against them. Everybody knows that Utah is more successful when they can get those 3-point shots off, and especially with Gabe Madsen. And instead, they continue to crowd the perimeter, allowing the defense to be able to just stay up there. And yeah, that works to the advantage of Ezra Asar because he can go down there and work, and occasionally Lawson Lovering, depending on if he wants to play. But, like, there's a difference there. Like, and I understand every night is a difference, right? But you have these moments where Lawson Lovering is clearly one of the best post players in the game, right? Like, he's aggressive. He's coming in there. You see he wants it. And then there's these other games where he becomes kind of lost. And I don't want to, like, point fingers at all these players, right? Like, that's not my intent. My intent is just to kind of react to how this goes. But that's the problem with what's going on with Utah, is you have players that are taking, I don't want to say they're taking nights off, but there's inconsistency there where if you have Lovering, I've still never understood why you want him up at the top of the post to be able to set that screen. You can have somebody else. Have some, like, I get that you want Ezra down on the post because he's probably the more athletic, better player, but you have big guys that can screen, right? You could even put Mike Sharvjumps to screen. You could put Miro Little to screen. I don't care who you get to screen. A screen's a screen if you set it right. And if you can do that, they can't get around you, right? They can jump over you, but then it's a foul. And so, like, you can set a screen. It doesn't have to be Lawson. So instead of crowding that perimeter and crowding knowing that it's already going to be probably, two guys going to jump to Gabe Madsen if they can, why bring that attention there? Why add to that or make it easier for the defense to do that? Those are those types of things that are frustrating to me. But this is the situation with Utah, right? They're just inconsistent. You're going to get a game where they look like, okay, maybe they figured it out. And I think there's parts of it where some players are figuring it out. And then you're going to go and see a game like this where it's head scratching, where you just, like, you have no idea. And, like, you don't know where Utah goes from this. It's tough. And I know some people want to point to inconsistent reffing, and to a point, like, I don't disagree. Like, and this isn't in the Big 12. Like, I've hated college refs for a long time. Like, you watch the pros, and, like, you can find some arguments in there, right? But, like, you watch college reffing, and it gets even worse at the women's game. But that's a different debate. There's so much inconsistency in reffing. And for me, like, I get it. Like, I've done some minor reffing at, like, little levels. So, like, I'm not trying to sit here and say I get it, right? But at the same time, it is much harder than most people expect. Even if you had to do, like, a church ball type thing or a rec reffing, like, it's hard. And you've got parents screaming at you. You've got everybody hating you. Like, I get it, right? Like, it's not easy. Things go fast. You and I can sit there on a TV and say, oh, like, how was that? Even in a game, from my vantage point where I'm up, a couple 100 feet or whatever it is. It's not 100 feet, but you know what I mean? Like, I can see things and it looks like it's something. When in reality, like, I don't know how close it is. Like, maybe it looked like a travel, or maybe it looked like a foul. Like, those are those things, like, unless you're in the mix of it, it's really hard to tell. And we can go and slow it down and look at things in replay and be like, oh, that was awful. But these guys are having to do this in real time. So, like, it's a tough spot. My problem is when the inconsistency is there's moments in a game where they're playing it really tight. They're calling whistles on everything, and then later on, they're allowing murder to happen, right? Guys are getting hacked to death and doing different things that way. And this is both teams. This is not to the effect of Utah, right? Like, I'm not sitting here trying to say that Utah is the only one getting screwed. I mean, like, look at the BYU-Arizona game. BYU absolutely got a gifted call. And, like, this is nothing against BYU. That foul against Arizona, like, you just don't call that, right? Like, that's just not something, and I'm not saying it's even one of those in the end of game situations. I don't need to relive this BYU-Utah thing where it was at the end of a game, you don't call that type stuff. It's a foul, it's a foul. We're not getting into that. The reality is, though, I didn't see a foul, and maybe there was a subtle one, but, like, it was so minuscule that it like, those are the ones that do change games, right? Now, it's easy to point to those, like, it's easy to say, oh, that impacted the game. And ultimately it did, because you put somebody at the free throw line to be able to win the game. But as we know, like, fouls or anything, it's the totality of the game, right? It's like looking at this game and you can say, oh, that travel on Miro Little, by definition it was a travel, but most people don't get called that. Okay, sure. Oh, they didn't review that goaltending call that Mike Sharvjumps got. It wasn't goaltending, but they didn't review it, and I'm still confused why they didn't. It's easy to point to those and be like, well, if it wasn't for that, that's 5-point swing right there, right? Okay, so maybe you win the game by 1 point. But the reality is Utah had 19 turnovers. I'm going to keep coming back to that. It was the same thing. We'll go back into the football game. BYU and Utah. You can complain about that. The reality is Utah didn't score in that second half. Right? Like, you can sit here and point the blame on other people and these refs and do different things and be frustrated. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be frustrated. Those are frustrating. I sit here and watch these games, and you've clearly seen that on my Twitter account. If you follow me, like, I get frustrated with reffing. Like, I shouldn't, because I know that's part of the game, but it's just stupid. Like, it's just inconsistency. It's dumb to watch these games have no rhythm, especially in the collegiate game, because the refs decide to insert themselves. So the reality is like, they can impact it, but there's other factors that are on the floor, right? Both of these teams have to deal with it. And unless the disparity is massive for one team over another, both teams are having to deal with fouls. And it's a matter of how you address it. It's a matter of how you decide what those refs are going to call. If they're going to call ticky-tack fouls, maybe you ease off a little bit. If they're going to be aggressive, go in and be aggressive, right? Like, that's how you play the game. And for whatever reason, that's going to be the frustration. So that was just a little side note, but inconsistent reffing, I get it. And I understand you can have some frustrations from this game, but at the end of the day, Utah had 19 turnovers that led to 20 points. So whatever. All right. So where does Utah go from here? I mean, going into this game, there was some, and I say that with a very, I don't even know what to say. It's so minuscule, but there was some talk of maybe Utah can be an NCAA tournament team, right? And I think people look at the Big 12 schedule and they look at how challenging it is, and it is challenging. But you're looking at it, and Utah's got these 2 wins over Kansas programs. If they can get a third, not that UCF was going to be some decider in Utah being able to be an NCAA tournament team, but you had people kind of slowly talking about Utah's maybe, right? And even then, just getting to the bubble would be a tall task, right? Coming into the game, I think they were 72nd in net or something like that. I can't remember. I looked it up, and my mind is gone, and I didn't write it down, but you're outside, right? You're not even easily inside the bubble. And so you had a long ways to go. But, at least you were being talked about, right? And I'm not saying that as some moral victory that at least Utah's talked about the NCAA tournament. Nobody cares. Utah hasn't been to the NCAA tournament for 8 years? 9 years now? I can't remember the seasons. Yeah, whatever. I covered the last time, and time goes so fast. But it happens. So this, you want to be in that conversation, but at the same time, you've got to live up to that, right? You've got to be able to move forward. So as this goes, is Craig Smith going to return? That's the question that everybody's going to have. And depending on how you view this, you either want him to come or you don't. And I don't know that there's an easy answer here, because I've talked about it many times, that there's not a great answer in who you're going to bring back if Utah doesn't get the support that they need. So I'm going to leave it at that. We'll talk about that more as the season progresses. I know we're getting to the end of it, but we're not going to have the Craig Smith, is he coming back conversation yet, but that's definitely going to be there, and losing games like UCF isn't going to help. So, we'll see what happens. What's left on the schedule for Utah is what makes this even more challenging. So Wednesday they go on the road to Arizona, who just lost to BYU. And you can say that you beat BYU, so you could go beat Arizona. Look, Arizona is a different level, and BYU is at a different level than when Utah played them. So that's a tall task. And Arizona's always been a thorn in Utah's side. They have stolen wins from them, so it's not to say that they can't. But I think you really have to have your best attention and play as a team to be able to beat a team like Arizona. So we'll see what happens. You get to come home on Saturday against Arizona State in a doubleheader. The women's play early, and then the men's play that night. Then you get West Virginia for senior night next Tuesday, and then you finish out the season at BYU. And, you look at that schedule, that's tough, right? You needed that UCF game to build momentum. It gives you kind of that edge to be able to come in there, and now you're a wounded animal trying to come in there against Arizona. And I don't even use the wounded animal in the right way that some people say, oh, you can't trust a wounded animal. this Utah team, they've been a wounded animal for a long time. So it's not like it's some badge of honor that like they can suddenly rebound and come win. Now, that's not to say that Utah couldn't win at McKell Center. I just don't see that. And so you've got a really tough slate for your final stretch of the season. So we'll see. Rough situation for the Runnin Utes, but that's where we've been at, and that's kind of what we predicted. So let's turn to the women's team. The women's team were on the road yesterday as well. Doubleheader game, not in the same spot, obviously, but they were on the road to Cincinnati. They were coming off a disappointing loss to Oklahoma State. This is another team that, for all the success that they've had, when those turnovers happen, man, it really hurts this team, and that's what happened against Oklahoma State. They allowed some three-point shooting late in the game that allowed them to lose the edge, and suddenly Utah didn't have that momentum. So, this was a good rebound from that. They won 92-65 over Cincinnati, made 16 three-pointers. They only had 11 turnovers compared to, some of these games that they've had, and so it was a much better performance. So Utah really got it done, though. The first quarter jumped out to 26-10. First quarter lead. That's really kind of been the script for Utah this year. If they can jump out to that first quarter lead, I'd have to go back and look at it, but if you get a sizable margin, Utah almost always wins, right? Like they've done a really good job of being able to do that. Those games like against Oklahoma State or Kansas State, they either lost the advantage early or they were in a really tight battle in that first quarter. And when that happens, Utah's had a much tougher time trying to win games, right? So Utah's strategy essentially is if they can jump out to this first quarter lead, by and large, they can hold serve and kind of win out these games. And when they have their struggles, and every team's going to have their struggles, right? Like you're not going to be perfect for every minute of a game. That at least gives them that margin of error that helps. And so first quarter, 26-10, great. Second quarter, they were still fine. The margin was tighter. I think that it was 19-15 that Utah outscored Cincinnati. And so, you build on your lead, but it wasn't like earth-shattering numbers. And then in the third quarter, Utah was outscored. That was kind of the quarter where Utah fell apart. They usually have one of these quarters a game where it just doesn't go their way. They kind of take their foot off the gas a little bit, and as Gavin Peterson calls it, they play my turn basketball, where players start to take it over for themselves. It's not fully selfish, but they get into that mode where they're not fully thinking as a team. And that really kind of, I don't want to say sinks them, but, in these games where they have a big lead, it's okay. It's those games like I mentioned against Oklahoma State or Kansas State or something like that where things have been more challenging. But then in the final quarter, they win the quarter 26-15, a bunch of three-pointers from Utah to really kind of set the edge, go up by 25 points at one point. This was just a standout performance by them to be able to do really well. And it was none other. Sorry, I'm still kind of struggling to talk at this point. The congestion is not very. It's not helping. We'll say. So we'll keep persevering. But this is the same act, right? Like you've got Gianna Neepkins, who led the team with 25 points. She had 6 3-pointers on 10 attempts. Kennedy McQueen, 17 points on 5 of 8 shooting from deep. Between them, that's 11 three-pointers. It just kind of shows the talent and versatility those two have that really make Utah go. And if those two can hit, there's not a lot of teams that can beat Utah, right? It just depends on how they kind of interact. Kennedy McQueen, by the way, she broke an all-time record for Utah where she became, she's played 139 games for the Utes, which is the most of any player. Kind of cool, especially for the hometown girl who, wasn't, I don't want to say that she wasn't expected to be this good, but I think there was some people that wondered if she could take her small town, Hennifer roots to Utah and kind of have an impact. And clearly she's had an impact. She's done a phenomenal job. As I've talked about with Gianna and Kennedy, they're in the 50, 40, 90 club. These are two elite athletes that just continue to hit at a high level and make Utah go. So pretty cool to see that for her. Obviously, that means nothing at the end. They want to have. I don't want to say it means nothing, but it doesn't mean as much as them wanting to go deep in the playoffs, right? Like they want to be able to have deep runs and look at that and be able to say this is who they are. Win a Big 12 championship, that kind of stuff. Outside of that, Maya Torre, 14.6 rebounds. That's exactly the types of numbers that you need from her. You need her to be able to be a presence in the post and be able to impact the game with rebounds. And then Maddie Wilkie continues to produce as well. 13 points on 4 of 7 shooting from deep. So she's been able to have some success as well from 3-point range. And she's a great threat outside of being able to come off the bench and be that sixth person who really impacts the game. You put Gianna or Kennedy on the bench for a minute and you throw Maddie out there and you're not really missing a ton, right? She goes out there and she continues to hit the three-pointers. She's a great defender. She comes in there and works really hard. The funny thing is she missed her first free throw of the season. She's had 100% free throw shooting this whole year. And granted, she's only had like 18 attempts coming into this game, so it's not a ton. But the fact that she just missed her first free throw in the final week of the regular season kind of shows how effective she's been. So she's another one of those players that I've talked about being in that, that elite club of shooting. She's just outside of it, but it just shows the level of talent this Utah team has, what they're able to do. And so looking at their schedule, I don't need to dwell on that Cincinnati. I mean, you win by almost 30 points. Like, we don't need to get into that. So what's left on their schedule, this is really where it gets interesting, because this is the last week of the regular season for Utah. The women always have their tournament the week before the men's, and so this is the last week of the regular season. They go on the road to West Virginia on Wednesday, and then they have a home game in that afternoon slate against BYU to finish out the season. So, 2 games that, are winnable. West Virginia is a tough challenge. They are a ranked team that has played well as of late. You're on the road. That's why that Oklahoma State game was so pivotal for Utah, because you got them at home. You had the chance to win. Now you have to go on the road against a ranked opponent and try to get that win to be able to kind of keep yourself in some certain spots. But at the end of the day, I think Utah's standing in the Big 12 tournament as well as in the NCAA tournament is relatively locked. I think their seeding isn't going to improve a ton. Now, granted, if you beat West Virginia and then you go on a deep run, get to the Big 12 championship game, maybe even win the champion, obviously that stuff can help. And so things can happen. Excuse me. But you've got, you're relatively locked in. So Wednesday will be the toughest challenge, and that has, some impact on where Utah will finish for the Big 12 standings. And I'll get into that in just a second. So, and then you have BYU. That game, it was a lot closer in Provo than it should have been. I mean, BYU has been a team that has really struggled. Oddly enough, beat Oklahoma State at home. That was kind of the odd number, and they did it with a ton of turnovers too. Like, it was just an odd night. Oklahoma State couldn't shoot, and BYU took advantage, and then Utah couldn't. So I don't want to say that this is a guaranteed win, but by and large, I mean, Utah has clearly been a better team than BYU this year. They have some pieces; they're just not fully consistent, and they're the Runnin Utes of the women's side. We'll just call them that. So. Enough said, right? So let's look at, their Big 12 standings right now. So right now, they're tied in 4th place with Oklahoma State. Obviously, because Oklahoma State won, they would hold the tiebreaker if it ended that way. So Utah would essentially be 5th. If they did end in 5th, based on the seedings, right now, looking at the current matchup, they wouldn't get they would get a first round bye. They wouldn't get that second round bye. They would be obviously just outside of that, and they would play the winner of BYU or UCF in that first game. This is all subject to change, right? So, this last week there's a lot of variability with what's going on, but that's kind of where it would look. The projected look, though, is most likely, and I'm looking at this from the vantage point that if the projected team to win does win, this is what the standings would look like. Utah most likely finishes in 6th place in the Big 12. I know that's not the standing that they wanted. Obviously, they felt like that they were one of the best teams in the Big 12. The unfortunate thing is they couldn't win the games that they needed to. Clearly, they have a win against Notre Dame. They've got wins against big teams, so they can do it. Notre Dame, obviously, being number one in the country, so that's why I bring Notre Dame up. But they haven't been able to always get this to work the way that they wanted to. So Utah will most likely finish sixth. They could be a little bit higher depending on how these go, right? Like I said, these games will depend on this last week. And there is a tight race. I mean, Utah is 2 games out of first. They can't get first, but that's the way the current standings are. And so you've got teams like Kansas State, TCU, Baylor. Those 3 teams are really in the mix for the 1 seed, and how it shakes out. We'll see. TCU currently is in the lead. But the way that it all shakes out, like I said, if the projected winners do win the games that they have remaining, Kansas State will most likely take the number 1 seed, TCU number 2, Baylor number 3. Oklahoma State would finish in 4th. Oklahoma State pretty much seems like a lock for that 4th. First 3 seeds are kind of up and down. They're going to be a guarantee, but at the same time, we'll see. Oklahoma State, they have the easiest slate to finish, Cincinnati and Kansas. So them to finish in 4th place seems easy. And then West Virginia and Utah. So West Virginia would be 5th. But that comes down to this game on Wednesday. If Utah beats West Virginia, that obviously changes that. That gives them a better chance, would give them the tiebreaker, and so Utah could finish in 5th. Whether you finish in 5th or 6th, ultimately I don't think matters because those top, you're going to face some easier challenge in that second round. If they finish 6th, their projected matchup right now is Kansas or Arizona State. But you're then paired up with TCU or Baylor or potentially Kansas State. So it doesn't really matter whether you finish 5th, 6th, 7th, whatever. But I think that's the scenario that Utah's looking for, is just trying to be able to get into that top 4 seed. I just don't see it potentially happening. But this is a team that, obviously has potential, and we'll see how they relate, how they work. That Kansas State game, Kennedy McQueen wasn't available for, so we don't really know what Utah could be. But based on previous games, I mean, any one of these teams can present a tough challenge for Utah. Neutral sites, depending on how the fans attend, depending on momentum. Sometimes getting those buys don't always work, right? Because then a team has to they have to fight to be able to get to there, and so that they've got momentum on their side. And you'll get one of these teams that was a day 1 team, and they roll through a couple of these wins because they've got momentum and they know how it takes to win, and they've got that vibe going. So we're curious to see how this shakes out for Utah. So we'll see how that goes. Like I said last week, and then we'll get into Big 12 play. I will be down Kansas City for the women's team. I will not be there for men's this year. I'm going to go for the women's team. So I'll be there to do firsthand. I'll maybe try to take my podcast equipment and we'll go do some stuff there. All right, so we'll wrap it up. We'll wrap up the women's with that, and we'll move on to the last one. But before, let me tell you about my other partners. UFirst Credit Union. With UFirst Rewards checking account, you can earn monthly reward points for buying something special for your best friend. Then you can redeem your reward points for something special for yourself. And with no monthly maintenance fees plus free ID theft protection, you can love that UFirst Rewards checking is big on perks and peace of mind. Put your checking account to work for you so you can spend more time doing more rewarding things. It's easy rewards checking with UFirst Credit Union. Check out the full details at uFirstCU.com. All right, let's end this podcast with the Red Rocks. The Red Rocks had a great meet on, Friday? Friday. They played competed against Denver. Denver's one of those teams that coming into the Big 12, you looked at as probably being Utah's best competition. This conference hasn't been the best in terms of gymnastics competition. The Pac-12 was a little bit better. Obviously, you had UCLA in there, so that gave you an advantage. Cal, some of these other teams, Oregon State, that kind of stuff helped you. But the Big 12, just on a night-to-night basis, doesn't necessarily have that same consistency. And so this served as one of the toughest meets for Utah in conference play. And it started out that way. I mean, the Red Rocks trailed after the first rotation. Denver had a really good bars routine and took the early lead. But after that, it was all Utah. Utah goes out to score a 198.075. It's the highest score of the season for them. Obviously, a great opportunity for them to finally break the 198 barrier. You want to be peaking at the right time, and you're starting to see that with Utah. They're really kind of honing in on kind of what they need to do in terms of their sticks, trying to be able to look for those more instead of just kind of playing out of them. And Utah did really well there. Denver finishes with a 197.525 score, so a really good score for Denver. But at the same time, Utah was on another level, especially from that second rotation on. Vault, as I mentioned, this has been, and it has been for the last few years, kind of Utah's tougher event. And that's not to say that Utah can't be successful here or have great vaulters. They just haven't had the full consistency. And if they can find a way to be able to get the vault up, this absolutely could be a national, championship contending team. It just depends on what comes of that. So Utah is ranked in the top 5 in all 4 events. That's usually a good indicator for a team that can win a national championship. That's not a guarantee by any means, but it's a good indicator that they can. And so if they can shore up some vaulting, be able to get more consistency there, they can do well. But they've had individual vaulters that have done really well. Ella Zerbez, she scores a 9.925 in the leadoff to kind of start it out, and then it kind of, I don't want to say it fell from there. It wasn't like they were terrible scores, but it just wasn't as consistent. You're getting Grace McCallum, who is starting to become much better at vaulting. After her injury a couple of years ago, that really, I don't want to call it maybe PTSD, but it really set her back in terms of kind of her progression there. She wants to be able to do it, obviously, as an all-arounder, but it's been a challenge for her to kind of get over that hurdle of being able to be a good vaulter. And you're starting to see her progress every single week. And so, in theory, by the time postseason play happens, Grace could be at a very good spot for Utah to be able to get there. McKenna Smith continues to stick a lot of these. She had, a 3-week or 4-week stint where she had sticks, so doing well. But you're getting individual performances that are career best for a lot of gymnasts. Ashley Glenn had a career high 9.95 on bars. Jalen Gilstrap tied a career high of 9.95 on floor. Beam and Floor actually were the highest scores of the season. So Beam got a 49.575 and Floor got a 49.6. They did well to win this meet. Obviously, you get that 198. And Utah became the outright regular season winner of the Big 12 in their first season. So not really a surprise. I think this is one that if it's not Utah, it's surprising. Same with going into the Big 12 championship in a couple weeks. Utah's the favorite to win. Anything can happen, but, Utah's a favorite. Just a few things from this meet. Grace McCallum was just shy of tying or breaking her career high in the all-around. She scored a 39.8. Her high previously is a 39.825. But she scored a 9.975 on bars, beam, and floor, and the crowd booed. And there's context there, right? Like, they're not booing at Grace McCallum. They're booing the judges because on each of those events, one judge gave a 10 and the other judge gave a 9.95. It is what it is. There was one judge that, no matter what happened, they were always going to be the lower score. Was always finding, something to take points off, and it happens, right? Like, whether Grace got a 10 or a 9.975 ultimately doesn't matter. I mean, I know for personal reasons you want to get those 10s. She's gotten a 10 on bars and floor before. If I remember right, she's never had a 10 on beam. So, really fascinating to see what could happen. But the fact that she's this high, I mean, she's been breaking these numbers for quite a while, where 9.95 feels kind of like the standard for her. If she's not getting that, something went wrong. Obviously had a 10 the week before. So she's done really well. So this is the year of Grace McCallum. There was a new vibe about her going into the season that just felt like she kind of trusted herself. Sometimes she gets a little too critical of herself, and she kind of is her own worst enemy. But she's really thriving right now, and Utah, love to see that and be able to have her. Side note, Avery Neff competed on beam for the first time this week. She'd only had like 4 practices before competing on beam, but she continues to go. At this rate, I wouldn't be surprised if she is in the all-around by the end of the season. It's still wild that that's even in consideration, but the way that she's going, her perseverance and determination, I wouldn't be surprised if she's in the all-around for, the UCLA meet or for regionals or nationals, whatever it may be. I mean, this is a gymnast that is absolutely determined to be able to be back at full level. So if they can get her for the all-around and she can compete at a high level, that absolutely helps Utah, especially on vault. I believe that would be a great opportunity for Utah because she was really doing a phenomenal job. So we'll see there. Utah's NQS, for a time being, they jumped into third, but UCLA jumped back. The NQS is basically the rating system. It takes the 6th highest scores of the season, three of which have to be at a road or neutral site. You drop the highest score, and then you average the 5 remaining scores together. So right now, those are the Iowa State score, the Arizona. Those are your 2 home, and then you get best of Utah, BYU, and West Virginia as your road/neutral scores. The outlier here is the BYU score, where Utah scored a 196.975. It's a high 196 number, but Utah clearly doesn't want to count a number below 197. And so they have one more opportunity to get a road meet where they can improve that. That's at Washington on March 8th. So they get this week off, and then they compete next week. So in theory, any number over 197, which, seems to be a standard for Utah, outside of some crazy things like happened against Arizona State. They should be able to improve on that NQS, but other teams around the country will probably improve on theirs as well. So we'll see how that goes. You've got that. Utah then finishes out the regular season against UCLA at home. That's going to be an epic night. Those matchups have always been phenomenal. It's a senior night. There's going to be a lot of emotions there, and you're going to have a team that is in, 2 teams in the top 4 in the country. So really exciting to be able to see that. They've competed against UCLA many times. They know what this is like. You get them on an even plane, and we'll see what happens. So really fascinated to see what happens there. And then obviously Utah goes into the Big 12 championship on March 22nd. So that's kind of what's left on the schedule. They will then host regionals, so they're already guaranteed to be, there as the host. Likely as it stands right now, Utah is the 4 seed. The reason why 4 seed, sounds fine, but the way that the pairings go is the 4 seed is always the hardest of the top seeds, because then you get paired up with the team most similar to you in the rankings. So it goes 4-5. It's kind of a snake draft, snake order, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, they get in their regionals, and then 5 goes starting back with Utah, if they're in 4, and then 3 goes with 6, vice versa. So it just continues a snake, and so the regional with the 4 seed generally becomes the hardest regional, just because you've got teams that are more talented. Whereas being the number 1 seed, obviously you get the easiest because you get the 1 and then the 8 seed, and you continue down that order of rankings. And so any way that Utah can improve their seed line will be better for them. At the same time, I don't want to say that the teams below them aren't a challenge, but I think this, it to me, it doesn't ultimately matter. You've got the regional at the Huntsman Center. You've got the crowd, as your support. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how that goes. But as it's projected, Utah would play or compete with California as the 5 seed, Oregon State as the 12 seed, and Minnesota as the 13 seed. Obviously, there's other teams there, but those would be the highest seeds, and then the regional would be split. So it'd be fascinating to see there. So that's it for this. I've gone on long enough, and my voice is really struggling, and I'm trying hard to stay here. So we're going to end today. Hopefully I can get out of this sickness and be done. But with that, I'll sign off. Have a great day.